Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we're diving right into a seriously fascinating moment in time today. Picture this. It's November 28th, 1923. Europe is right in the thick of the roaring 20s, scientific paradigms are just shifting everywhere, and over in Dornach, Switzerland, the esoteric philosopher Rudolf Steiner is standing in front of a group of workers. He's about to deliver his second lecture on bees. And listen, this is definitely not your standard biology lesson. We're going to unpack this specific, totally captivating chapter of his work and figure out exactly how Steiner viewed the hidden, subjective life of the hive.
So here's our quick roadmap for today. We're going to start with the invisible color question, move right into chemistry versus inner feeling, then explore a really unique sensory space between smell and taste. After that, we'll look at the social dynamics in the swarm's bitter pill, and finally bring it all together with the hive as one.
All right, so we're drawing directly from the transcribed text of Steiner's lectures here, specifically anchoring everything today in the profound insights of Lecture 2. Now, it's pretty vital to understand who Steiner was actually talking to in Dornach. He wasn't just standing in a stuffy room lecturing to academics. Nope. His audience included practical, dirt-under-the-fingernails laborers and actual beekeepers. So there's this beautiful historical friction going on. You've got Steiner, the spiritual philosopher, actively responding to the complex scientific literature of his day, but he's framing it for folks who literally work with bees every single day. He's blending rigorous observational science with his own highly unique spiritual scientific perspective, essentially forcing everyone in that room to completely rethink the insects buzzing right outside their windows.
Part 1. The invisible color question. Can bees see what we can't? Let's kick things off with a massive, burning scientific question from Steiner's era.
During this lecture, someone brought up an article printed in the Swiss apiculture newspaper from early 1923 by a Professor Buttel-Riepen, and it posed an incredibly exciting question for the time. Can bees see colors invisible to human beings? Now, you have to remember the scientific zeitgeist of the 1920s, right? Researchers were just beginning to probe the absolute limits of animal perception, pushing way beyond the known spectrum. This article referenced some really cutting-edge experiments by prominent scientists of the day, guys like Farrell, Kuhn, and Pohl. These brilliant minds were running tests, desperately trying to solve the mystery of bee vision and map out exactly what stimuli these little guys were truly responding to in the wild.
So these scientists were intensely focused on whether bees could perceive ultraviolet light, those specific wavelengths that lie just beyond the blue and violet colors we humans can see. To test this, they used some highly reactive substances, specifically an acid salt called hexacyanoplatinate. Just imagine this in a lab. This chemical is incredibly sensitive to UV light. When it's exposed to unseen UV rays, it reacts. And the scientists meticulously watched how the bees interacted with it. And based on those observations, the scientific establishment of 1923 basically said, the bee's response is purely mechanical. To them, the bee was just a biological machine, and this was a blind chemical reaction to light. Nothing more, nothing less.
Which brings us to part 2, chemistry versus inner feeling, critiquing the mechanistic view. Because Steiner, he heavily critiqued this purely materialistic take.
Just look at the stark contrast between these two worldviews. Conventional science looked at the bee, saw the biological reaction to that chemical, and comfortably stamped it as a merely chemical process. Case closed. Right? But Steiner fiercely challenged his audience to look deeper. He argued that this cold, mechanistic view completely misses the subjective, lived experience of the animal. Now, yes, there's absolutely a chemical reaction happening within the bee's biology. Steiner totally acknowledges that. But according to his anthroposophic view, that physical chemical reaction is really just the outer shadow of something much more profound. He argued it's always accompanied by and is actually an expression of a very real, active inner feeling within the bee itself.
Steiner brilliantly points out a huge flaw in this mechanistic logic, and he uses us humans as the ultimate example. Think about it. When you step outside and watch a breathtaking, vivid violet sunset, what's actually happening? Technically, small chemical reactions are taking place right there in the retinas of your eyes. But do you look at a beautiful sunset and say, yes, my retinal chemicals are currently reacting? No, of course not. You undeniably experience the rich, profound inner feeling of seeing that beautiful color. We don't just reduce human sight to a blind chemical reaction. So Steiner boldly argues that the intense chemical activity in the bee when it's exposed to UV light is exactly the same. It's the physical footprint of an intense, subjective inner feeling.
Moving right along to Section 3, Between Smell and Taste, a Unique Sensory World. Let's see how this builds into a totally new way of understanding these creatures.
Okay, so if the bee's perception isn't just some cold chemical reflex, and if it isn't exactly like human optical sight either, how does Steiner actually describe the way bees experience their environment? Well, he defines their primary mode of perception as a completely unique hybrid sense that hovers right midway between smelling and tasting. Honestly, this is a genuinely mind-bending concept for us to grasp. Imagine a sensory input that isn't cleanly divided. When those scientists in the 20s thought they were testing vision, Steiner suggests they were actually triggering this unified sensory capability. The bee isn't just looking at a picture of the world, it's actively internalizing it through a sense that completely blurs the lines of our distinct human senses.
And this brilliant framing perfectly captures the reality of the bee's daily existence. When we walk up to a flower, we see sharp boundaries, distinct edges, clear colors. But a bee? According to Steiner, bees navigate this highly sensitive chemical twilight. They don't see the crisp edge of a petal. They're effectively tasting and smelling the light and the chemical signatures radiating off that plant. It's a fully immersive, subjective experience. They're essentially swimming through a gradient of sensory data, where the chemistry of the outside world intimately interacts with their inner feeling life. It's not just a visual world. It is a rich, atmospheric, chemical twilight they are constantly absorbing.
Part 4. The swarm's bitter pill. Social dynamics of the hive. Because if bees have this rich inner feeling, it has to profoundly affect the entire hive, right?
Steiner explores this by walking his audience of practical beekeepers through a very specific, chronological disruption in the hive's leadership. Imagine this natural event. A swarm leaves the hive with its old queen looking for a new home. But then, a beekeeper actively intervenes. They remove the old, beloved queen, take the swarm, and force them to return to the physical hive, where a completely new alien queen has been introduced. Now, to a purely mechanistic scientist, this is just simple math, right? You just swapped one egg-laying biological part for another to keep the machine running. But to Steiner, who sees the hive as a feeling entity, the bees are undergoing a profoundly traumatic inner experience during this intervention.
Because of that intense, shared inner feeling we talked about, the swarm actively senses this loss on a collective level. They absolutely know their old queen is gone. They sense the presence of this new, foreign queen, and it is a massive, difficult psychological adjustment. They forcefully swallow what Steiner eloquently calls the bitter pill. And listen, this isn't just a metaphor for him. It's a phrase he uses to describe a very real, soul-level resignation that the entire swarm goes through when adapting to the beekeeper's heavy-handed intervention. Honestly, it completely changes how you view a beehive buzzing in your backyard. It's not just blind instinct driving them back to work. It's a deeply felt, actively processed shift in the hive's collective emotional equilibrium.
Finally, Section 5, the hive as one, the holistic conclusion. This brings us to the very core of Steiner's anthroposophic perspective. So, the absolute crucial point, the grand takeaway of this November 1923 lecture is this. The hive operates as a deeply connected, singular feeling entity. It is absolutely not a mechanical collection of blind chemical responses just bouncing off one another. Whether a bee is reacting to ultraviolet light in a lab, or a massive swarm is reacting to the sudden, jarring introduction of a new queen, they're experiencing their world through that unique, immersive twilight sense between taste and smell. Steiner's passionate plea to the workers, the beekeepers, and really the whole scientific community was that true science has to look beyond just the raw physical chemistry. We have to elevate our perspective to recognize the subjective, shared, living experience of these incredible insects.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this provocative thought from our exploration today. If a process that modern science so easily dismisses as purely chemical can actually hold a rich, deeply felt inner reality for a single bee, well, what else might we be completely missing in our mechanical observations of the natural world all around us? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what lies just beneath the surface.